Good morning, everyone, and welcome to North Alabama Law Review presented by Johnston, Weston. We're happy to have you today. And we also have Mr. Christopher Weston, who's with us every time. And we also have Mr. Mickey Gentle joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning to you both.
Good morning. And I swear to everyone at home, I am trying to find a replacement so you don't have to look at this mug every time.
Well, guys, we all have heard the news, and the buzz around town is Space Command, and they are coming to Huntsville. So as we know, when it comes to Huntsville, we're going to have multiple changes, whether it become more traffic, the housing market, people bringing their businesses here to help the government and all the infrastructure improvements that they're going to need to do, and their support their defense strategies. So we want to talk today about a little bit of the good things and the bad things that could possibly come with Space Command coming to our area. Guys, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I will, Mickey. Unless you want to go first, man.
No,
it's up to you.
Go ahead.
All right. So yeah, wow. Yeah, this is going to be a very, very, very big influx. And it is going to not so much change things, but it is going to definitely progress things forward in our growth as a community. I, for one, am very, very excited about it. And I'm very excited about this topic, actually, because it allows me to bring up something that we usually don't get to bring up in law, and that's the differences in laws among different states. And that's going to be one of the things that we run into, because we always do, when we see an influx, whether it's a business or unfortunately car accidents or people dealing with rental properties or purchasing properties or building properties or contracting or really anything across the board is that you have an influx of people from elsewhere who come into Alabama, and most people don't realize that while the laws are similar among different states, there are enough changes when you transfer that can actually have a pretty big impact. I'll go into a couple of these if you guys don't mind, just to, is kind of give a breakdown. One of the things we do at my firm is, mold law, mold litigation, both on the landlord side and the tenant side. Well, a lot of states have a mold statute that says if this level of mold is found in your residence or business or whatever, it has to be shut down, or it has to be vacated or cleaned or condemned or any number of different things. Alabama doesn't have that. Alabama has a general negligence standard when it comes to mold. So basically the mold isn't a problem until it is. And that's a huge change. A lot of people don't know to look for things like that. They're also dealing with, what's called contributory negligence, which is very different to comparable fault, which you see in other states. And so Alabama, you see this a lot in the personal injury side. Just a lot, especially with car accidents or, any kind of accident. So if you're dealing with Alabama has contributory negligence, which means if you are even 1% at fault for whatever happened, that is a defense for you collecting at all. Meaning even if the other side was 99% at fault, there might be a bar to you getting anything because you were 1% at fault. That is called contributory negligence. I think that's only in one other state in the country. Whereas most states have what's called comparable fault. And what that is a jury or a judge can attribute a portion. So let's say the total damage amount is $100,000, just to use rough numbers. And they determine that the other side is 75% at fault and you were 25% at fault. Well, what would happen in that case? You would get $75,000, roughly speaking, just using very general terms here. But that's comparable fault. And so you have a lot of people coming in from other states who may not understand that if you're even a little bit negligent or a little bit at fault for what happened is, you cannot collect. Mold issues, you're going to have all of the housing issues where people may want to buy, dealing with, the humidity, the, flood zones in Alabama, the, different land management issues. So you're going to have everything across the board that you see when you have an influx of people from other states, other countries, or wherever. You're also going to have the interplay of, especially this being a federal issue, there's going to be certain immunity issues. So, people don't realize is that outside of it being its own separate corporation that may do government contracting or may have been formed by the government, et cetera, there are a lot of instances where there is immunity, sometimes qualified immunity, sometimes full immunity of sovereign bodies like a state, federal government, et cetera. And so you're also going to have the interplay of the Board of Adjustments, which is when an immune body, and again, this is more on the state side, but when an immune entity does cause damage, you go through the Board of Adjustments. Or you're dealing with federal contracts, you're dealing with international contracts, you're dealing with the interplay of businesses, both local and what are known as foreign, corporations doing business across the arsenal line. And so you're going to have the interplay of contract, rental properties, again, building properties, and then the interaction of, these individuals who are coming in with, all of North Alabama, which, again, their expectations can be very different on what is reasonable or what is allowable versus Alabama. So again, gun laws here are, in my opinion, what they should be. But you're getting a lot of people who are not going to be used to seeing someone carry open carry or concealed carry in mass. And so, if you're dealing with something like where they feel threatened, where they feel it is reasonable to use force, on the criminal side in self-defense, their mentality may be very different than those who have been here for a while. And so, again, you're going to have some, cultural clash. You're going to see a lot of, legal clash in the way they're used to operating versus the way they operate now. We deal with this a lot. So, just so everyone, at home understands, is that let's say you own a business or a corporation, LLC, whatever, outside of state. Well, then you move that into this state. Well, you have to domesticate that corporation or LLC or whatever it is, or register it as a foreign corporation. Now, that doesn't mean foreign as in another country. It just means formed outside the state of Alabama. Well, when that happens, and you have all of these contracts from whatever state you're used to being in, well, there's going to be a lot of differences that need to be changed in your contract if you're doing a lot of business here. You'll even see that, if you read through any of your contracts at home, you will see these different clauses where it says like California, Michigan, Wisconsin, or whatever, this term applies, whereas to everyone else it doesn't. That's what I'm talking about, is that you will see, state-specific clauses and contracts that are, coming into our state. Some are enforceable, some are not. Also, you're going to have businesses that remain outside of the state that are doing a lot more business inside the state. Well, you can run into having to go to federal court because of what's called diversity jurisdiction, depending on the amount of the claim. And so you're going to see definitely a kind of social evolution and a legal evolution as we get another influx of individuals. And so, that's not a negative thing. You have to remember, who you are, where you come from, but at the same time, never ignore a new idea. It's something I tell clients all the time. Just because something exists that either does exist or shouldn't exist, or you don't like or you do like, doesn't mean that you can ignore it. And so these things, being in existence or these changes happening, you're going to have to adapt to as a business, as an individual, and again, be able to retain who you are and what you believe in or the way you do business, while simultaneously taking into account these changes. And that's going to be defending against them sometimes, incorporating them sometimes. It is going to be a very unique circumstance. And to be honest with you, in the areas of law that we practice in, and to be honest with you, law in general, those are always exciting times because you see where the chinks in the armor are. And you either adapt your armor or you fill in the gaps. And it's always a good time. And I'm not going to lie, it's also lucrative.
And I think another topic when it comes to Space Command is at least mentioning, you know, I'm pretty sure there's going to have employment contracts, maybe even severance packages for people who don't want to exactly retire here, only want to come here short period of time. What advice would you give someone who is maybe looking into entering an employment contract and moving here and setting their roots here?
Okay, so actually this is one of the things that probably won't change all that much, because these federal employment contracts, you know, again, they fall under federal law a lot of times, you know, and most of the time that will supersede state law, okay? As far as that specific employment, that's not always the case. But, you know, again, it comes down to your general terms, because again, contracts are very similar, you know, across the nation and through different jurisdictions. And one of those is, you know what you're dealing with. Read it. If you don't understand it, get some advice. Us, somebody else. Make sure somebody can go through that with you and make sure you completely and utterly understand, in other words, know what you're agreeing to. And a lot of times those are negotiable. Now, there's going to be certain bounds when it comes to, you know, federal employment contracts. You know, they are a lot more structured. Alabama is what's known as an at-will employment state. Federal law, once you get employed, there are different policies, procedures, code sections that have to be dealt with. And you need to know what those are. And, you know, going through all of them here would be literally impossible. I mean, this is one of those areas where there is a lot of litigation on and a lot of code. But they stay within the bounds most of the time because you're dealing with federal contractors. Where you run into problems is differences in how bonuses or commissions or, you know, performance markers are measured. You know, what those terms are and how they apply. Again, choice of law, federal versus state. And so understanding all of that, just so you know what you're agreeing to, is just the greatest bit of advice that I can give, is know what you're signing. And again, even if it's not ideal, a lot of times it may be worth it to you to sign and move on. You know, it's not necessarily, you know, everything's not a federal case. You know, as they say, you don't need to make a federal case out of everything. But know what you're signing. And if there's a problem with it or something that just doesn't feel right, you know, you'll get a tickler. You know, most people do. And if that happens, see somebody, get a little advice and decide what you want to do. Make your choices knowingly.
I think that's great advice. Mickey, do you have anything to add?
Yes. The reality is that with an influx of new people, there's probably going to be divorce considerations that will have to be taken up. And in my experience, I've gotten a lot of calls before from someone who wants to get a divorce, and they say that they got married in another state and wanted to know if Alabama could divorce them, or an Alabama court could issue the decree of divorce. And certainly that is a possibility. If people have been married in another state and they live in Alabama, there are the pathways to that. As a way of illustration, I've often told potential clients that it doesn't make any difference which state each person is from. They could be from two different states, meet in a third state, get married in a fourth state, and live in Alabama. And as long as they meet the statutory requirements of residency, then Alabama can absolutely, through their courts, issue the decree of divorce.
You can also register foreign judgments here, or foreign decrees here, correct?
That's true. Where another state has issued some sort of an order, perhaps in another state a divorce has taken place and there is a custody and child support order in that state, then you can register that decree in Alabama.
And so there is a difference then between enforcing a foreign order and getting a new order or a new case. And it seems like what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm actually curious. So if you have a foreign order, you can enforce it oftentimes in Alabama, but if you need a new order or a change, you need to meet residency requirements. Is that what, 6 months like normal?
It is 6 months, yes.
Okay.
6 months.
Yeah. Thank you, Mickey. I'm sorry to jump in on you there, but I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
We learn something new every day, right? All right, well, I'm going to jump into some viewer submitted questions unless we have anything else to add about Space Command. I think we covered enough topics to give you guys a little bit of start there. So the first question we have is, Mickey, it looks like it's going to be a question for you. So the person asks, my husband and I are divorcing and we do not agree on everything, but we do not want to go through a court proceeding. What are our options?
That's actually a very interesting question because I've faced that a number of times myself in my practice. They do have options short of going to court. Now, ultimately, the reality is that there will have to be a decree signed by a judge in one of the courts that would finalize the divorce. But in terms of resolution of the issues that are pending in the divorce, it sounds like this particular party has some agreement, but some disagreement. So one option that is available is called mediation. It is a form of alternative dispute resolution that is available across the various civil litigation and domestic relations and family law arenas. And so what that really boils down to is the mediator is a neutral party who will not give legal advice to either party, but is there to try to assist them in coming to a settlement if that is possible. And that mediator will solicit an initial offer from one side, take it to the other, and get some sort of response, where that response might be accepting the offer that has been made, or it might be sending a counteroffer to the other side, where that mediator takes it to that initial side and presents that for the response. And that goes back and forth between the parties until either they come to an agreement on all of the issues, or it is seen that it cannot settle, and then ultimately a court would have to make the decision if they can't agree themselves.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mickey Gentle is actually registered as a mediator here at our firm, so he is able to assist that, or give you any kind of information or direction if that's something that you are considering, if you do not want to go through the whole divorce proceeding.
Yeah, I'll jump in on mediation because I do a lot of mediations. Now, not as the mediator. Mickey is far more patient than I am oftentimes, and a lot more understanding than I am oftentimes. I'm working on it. We all have our areas to grow in. But, I tell people about mediation all the time, and, people oftentimes will get fixated on whatever that one singular issue is, and who's right, who's wrong, how do I get what I feel is correct, what I feel is just on that one issue. And, I tell everyone, keep an open mind, because there's a lot of interrelation of issues in any type of case. I would imagine family law as well as, any kind of other civil litigation. There's a lot of interplay, and there are oftentimes, different perspectives. And, but not always. Sometimes one person is just being a rude individual and they just want their way. But you can oftentimes, if they're stuck on one issue, get around that by getting other things that you want, if that's not what your primary issue is. So I always tell people, should we go to trial, should we not? It's how big of an issue is this? If this is one of your, hard lines, well, then you may just have to litigate it. If it's something that you care about, but it's the other side's hard line, see what the options are, see what can be moved. And that's where using a mediator can be extremely helpful, because they're not looking at it just from the adversarial side. They're objective, they are a third party, and they may have ideas of ways to work around that issue, not just plow through it, which is what everyone, including lawyers, a lot of times would be like, well, we're gonna get through this issue, we're gonna fight this out, or we're gonna, work out this one singular issue. Understand, a lot of times there's workarounds. And so mediation, I usually will recommend it, because I've very rarely seen it not be helpful. even if it doesn't resolve the case. It really is helpful to define what the issues are, to define what everyone's position is, to define where the hard lines are. And I've never found one not to be useful, except for in one case, but I won't go into that. That was years ago.
I found that to be particularly helpful in family law cases too.
Especially where emotions are, where
Yes.
emotions are involved, I would think, yeah.
Yes.
Well, let me go into our next question. So our next viewer submitted question asks, what should I do if I was injured by a delivery driver in Madison County? Do I sue the company or do I sue the driver?
Okay, so again, another bigger question, and I thank the viewer at home for this. So the short answer usually is that you can sue both. That is called respondeat superior. Now again, beware, like I said, contributory negligence. If you're partially at fault, if you did something that was, let's say, less than advisable, like decide to do a cartwheel in the middle of the road, which unfortunately I have seen, right when they pull up because you're really happy about your Amazon package, it's not just a 100% answer, because again, it goes down to the facts and circumstances. But the way I understand this question is that the delivery driver was not paying attention, they did something wrong, and you were injured as a part of it. The short of it is that you can sue the driver for their negligence. You can also sue the company itself for what's called respondeat superior. Basically, this was your agent, this was your employee, and they hurt me, and so you are responsible as the employer, the person who put them behind the wheel of the truck. There are some exceptions to this, again, contributory negligence being one of them. If, and again, a delivery truck, if they're driving a delivery truck, can be a very different thing. But, other types of delivery drivers where they're using a personal vehicle, like Google Eats or whatever, DoorDash or whatever it is, where maybe they're not on the clock, maybe they're not actually working, even though they are technically a delivery driver. Also, if they are an independent contractor, okay, whereas they actually are not an employee of the company has really nothing to do with them, but they allow them to deliver for them, So you have independent contractor situations where you can only go after the independent contractor. But you also have other situations where you ordered it from a company, even if they're, delivery drivers and quote unquote independent driver. Well, you didn't hire that person, you hired the main company, and so they can still be liable. And so again, case by case, but generally speaking, which I say that a lot, and you'll understand why as the show goes on, is that there are a lot of different structures that businesses, companies, and individuals use to manage operations. That's why we're speaking generally. But I would say 9 times out of 10, if a delivery driver has injured you, struck you, and it's not some kind of intentional tort, you can sue both the driver and the company.
I think that kind of follows into a next question that was submitted. So this one says, how can I protect my small business if a customer is threatening to sue me for something that wasn't my fault? So it kind of seems like it may play off the last question a little bit.
It really does. Mickey, mind if I jump on
Go
this
ahead.
one?
Go ahead.
Again, business law. The short answer is learn how to say no. Okay? Staying out of legal matters is always the first goal of most businesses, unless you are, of course, in the business of law. But that can actually cause you to have greater problems in the future. I cannot tell you how many times simply saying, no, I'm not at fault. This was not me, leaving it at that and not engaging into an argument with whoever's fraudulently trying to push an accusation. And that does happen. I mean, that really does happen. They're looking for an easy paycheck. Again, fraudsters, right? They come in, they slip and fall, and really it had nothing to do with you. We see that all the time. And we also see it where, there was a problem with the premises and that's why they slipped and fell. But in the case of where you really don't feel it was your fault, do not try to argue with the person making that accusation, because again, if they are even somewhat sophisticated, or even if they're just irate, your attempts at justification of whatever happened can actually lead you into, a gray area in the law, some uncertainty. And that can be a major problem. As we see that all the time, where, well, no, it was actually over here. That spill that happened was over here. That spill may have had nothing to do with it. It may have been, 20 feet away, and you don't know. But you're trying to find the reason why this individual is making an accusation. We do that as human beings. We try to rationalize what is happening to us. In this type of a situation, I recommend don't do that. Okay, if you don't believe it was your fault, or a lot of times, even if you believe that it was, you say, no, this is not my fault, or no, I need to reach out to legal counsel, or I need to get advice on this. Let me get your information. Same way you do in a motor vehicle wreck. Getting out and arguing about who is at fault is not the right way to go. It's the same thing here. And so the ability to say no, the ability to say, I don't know, I need to look into this. Give me time. And if they keep pushing and pushing, that's a red flag, right? I don't know, I need to look into this, or no, it's not my fault, are very reasonable answers. And what happens then is they can't do anything in that moment. They're going themselves to have to get a lawyer, or to file a lawsuit, or to make a demand letter. You are not under as much time pressure as it may feel like in the moment. So step back, take a breath, decide what you want to do, and if you are uncertain, say so and get advice. Because if you try to justify, if you try to rationalize, if you try to handle it right then and there so that you never, have a problem, you can walk yourself into something worse, because there's nothing that requires them to accept whatever you're saying. And so you stating that, especially in the age of cell phones, trying to justify, now all of a sudden you are in litigation and the facts are not as clear as they would have been otherwise. And so be aware of what you're putting out in the world. And so that's my answer. Protect yourself.
Good answer. Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you guys for tuning in this morning. We will love to answer your questions on air. So please email them over to us at legalhelp@jmmtlawfirm.com, and we hope to hear from you. Again, thank you for tuning in this morning, and we'll see you next week. Have a great day.
And yeah, since we're here at the tail end of it, I do want to say, thank you guys for sending in the questions. We really do appreciate them. Thank you.
Thank you.